You know how to trade. You're confident in the rest of your life. You know how to win. You work hard and you're persistent. Yet you trade, and all of a sudden, all that knowledge that you've acquired over the years just blows up in your face, and you start doing really dumb, stupid things again, and again. What gives? I like to think of this as one of the big, huge barriers, one of the big, huge transitions in trading. The first thing that a beginning trader has to do is they have to build knowledge. They have to know about how to trade with an edge. And usually that takes 2 to 3 years. So they get there and they say, I'm working on this goal. I know what the goal is. I'm studying hard. I've got really good teachers, and I'm learning. And then you come to the moment where when you're trading paper, you can just about print money. But then you go to trading live and you're risking capital. And all of a sudden everything changes. Before you know it, you go tilt and you start doing things again that are unbecoming of a successful trader. And you go, why? I'm working hard. I'm doing all that. What I want you to do is to recognize that you've done a great job in the very first task of becoming a successful trader. You've developed the knowledge base. The problem is this: knowledge alone is not going to make you a successful trader. There's something even more fundamental, but you have to get the knowledge first. Without the knowledge, you don't know how to play the game. Now, we want to look at the inner game. We're at this transitional point where you've hit a barrier and you're seeing clearly, since you're over and over again, you're losing when you know how to trade. We know that we're at a barrier. First and foremost is acknowledge that you're at a barrier that somehow you can't get through, and you need to learn. You're seeing the failures. Listen to that failure and say, what is it? I'm here to learn. And this is the big separation. IQ, all that knowledge you have, and EQ, the emotional self-mastery that must be developed in order for you to use that knowledge in the thick of the game. Now remember, ultimately at the very background of this, you're saying, okay, I'm having emotional problems. Sometimes I get scared. Sometimes I get anxious. Sometimes I get where I just have an urgency to act and I overtrade and I do all this and then I get in trouble and I don't want to take a loss and blah, blah, blah. You're at the barrier. And what we now know is that the emotional intelligence for you to move from that first tier of getting the knowledge, you've hit it and you've realized that you need to learn how to master emotions of trading. That's what the task is. You need to develop EQ, emotional intelligence. The good news, unlike IQ, which is kind of set, EQ can be learned. And the first thing you do is you say, what do I need to do to make this transition from the knowledge-based stuff to where I take knowledge and I combine it with emotional strength to be able to maintain my edge? There you go. The very first thing, understand this. What's really happening to you is that all that knowledge is being just simply hijacked. You carry with you a deeply primitive brain from hundreds of thousands and millions of years ago. Remember, chimpanzees, a great ape, and us, another great ape, have 98% matching in their DNA. We're almost kissing cousins. That also means if you take a look at chimpanzees, I'm not saying we evolved from chimpanzees. We had a common ancestor. But if you take a look at chimpanzees, they're very violent. They're very impulsive. They don't think things through. It sounds a lot like us. We carry a lot of traits like chimpanzees as a group, and particularly when we're stressed. We go back to that primitive caveman brain of ours, and suddenly we have a completely different interpretation. It's no longer knowledge that we're going to use. Yeah, I've got an edge, and all I have to do is this, that, and the other, and I know that I'm protected, blah, blah. No. what happens to the caveman doesn't know about all that knowledge. That caveman knows that he lives in a very dangerous world. Remember, there were lions, tigers, and bears. And besides that, they were inhabiting the same caves that we looked for. And it was very common for them to hunt us. So we had every right, our ancestors did, to be basically negative assessment machines where we would look across the African savanna, and for as far as the eye could see, we could see these bushes. And we made an assumption that there was a saber-toothed tiger behind every last bush. And that was highly effective for our survival. Okay? It worked really well. It became a state trait. We are nervous, we have anxiety proneness, and we have a negative assessment machine as a brain. Just look at the last time you beat yourself up. That's the negative assessment machine, okay? So you've come to that moment where, okay, now what I have to do is I really have to master an ancient brain that was built for success in very different terms than we are. That's the deal. And understand this. There is no escape from emotions. Okay? As long as we breathe, you have emotions. However, we may not have freedom from emotion, but through EQ, we can develop freedom of emotion. What we want to do now is we want to be able to say, you know something, I am going to learn first about emotions. Like for instance, unless you understand an emotion as a biological action potential, that in fact's job it is to coordinate action between you, the trader, and the environment, the trading world, okay? And that's exactly what they're going to do. They learn lightning fast, and once they learn, a circuit is developed, and it does not wait for a thinking brain to show up and tell it that, oh, this would be a good time to have fear. This is where you need to keep patient, blah, blah. No, it automatically fires without you even knowing about it as a thinking brain. So once we grasp, oh my gosh, so anytime there is a deviation to a standard pattern in my chart that I'm trading, there is by definition an emotion that opens up. Yes. And then what happens when you take a look at your face while you trade, or your shoulders, or your body? What you're going to notice is how much tension that you have as you trade. Just put a cell phone and record yourself. Get a mirror, look at yourself, and you're going to start noticing how much tension and how much you hold your breath. Right there is the first step. It's trying to show you, but you have to develop the eyes to listen. When you start going tilted, and then you start seeing the precursors to that tilt, just absolutely tunnel visioned, and then all the tenseness, that's when you figure out that breathing and muscle tension are in fact part of emotion. And you can have enormous impact simply by anticipating and realizing that, you know, when I start seeing a trade heat up and I get really near that entry moment, that I can get really cranked up. Well, what happens is when you're cranked up, it's actually called an emotional acceleration. The arousal of the emotions happening, that's the tension, that's the holding the breath, that's all that stuff. You can interrupt it. You can interrupt it. Diaphragmatic breathing is the first core skill that I teach. And I don't see a person until they've had enough time to work with breathing, with tension reduction, so that they are beginning to build a pattern that they can activate while trading. Otherwise, there's really nothing for us to talk about. Unless you can regulate that emotion, it's all lost up into that second. So now we go, okay, we know what an emotion is a lot better. We know that it has a component called arousal that we can interrupt voluntarily. We can automatically train ourselves when we first start feeling that stress. Instead of going like this and holding, we can say, oh, I need to be breathing diaphragmatically. And all of a sudden you start going, okay, and it would look like this. It's exactly what I train traders to do. Take a breath in all the way into the belly. Let it expand the chest. Hold. Release slowly. As you release, let the tension in your body drain drain, drain, until you're loose and limp, like a sleeping baby. I want you to notice how much the emotion collapsed and how more manageable it became. Now imagine that you were to train that so that when things started heating up in a trade, that you were there prepared for it and started breathing so that you didn't lose your thinking brain. Okay? So this is what we actually mean by how do you make the transition. But more than that, understand this. In emotional mastery, it's just not regulation. Regulation is something you have to do or you'll never get to the door of the mind. Where the real fun comes is that when you develop mindfulness and step back out of thought and recognize that you and your thoughts are not the same. In fact, you don't have thoughts. They're having you. And that has to stop. You have to stop being mindless if you're going to be a successful trader. And so you develop mindfulness, and that's one of the core things that I also teach. In that, you're stepping back. That gets you to the door of the mind. That opens the door of the mind, and you can look in. And when you start looking in there, you discover your mind. Actually, what your mind is, your brain is a community of rival emotional programs that are duking it out for control of the you that trades, okay? Now, in humans like us, we develop another thing, is that thought shows up. We have language centers, and suddenly those emotions are given voice. And if you've ever beaten yourself up, if you've ever had that urgency to act, if you've really gotten bored and started looking around, just wanted to get out of the boredom and are in revenge, you know how powerful emotions can happen and how thought can happen. And you go, wow, wait, I can't allow myself to lose. I can't lose. Why not? And who is that voice saying, I can't lose? No, I'm going to double down. Who is that? That's where mindfulness kicks in. And knowing who that is and start realizing there's an architecture down there in the mind. And I teach you to find what I call the inner critic. That's the judger. That's all that criticism here. That's all that urgency. That's all that, got to get in right now. That's what I call the inner critic. It's not you. You need to distinguish the self that trades and the inner critic, which is highly destructive. You're also going to find an orphan nature that I call the adaptive voice. And it's the fear-based trading you do. It's the aggression-based trading you do. It's the tilt you do. It's the fear. Okay? That's orphan. And you're going to have to learn not to just slam it on the ground and shut it up. You're going to have to mentor it. You're going to have to teach it the way you would teach a child how to be in the world. Okay? That's powerful. But then you learn that you have enormously powerful internal resources that can be developed. You have the discipline of a ruler, the courage of a warrior, the self-soothing, the self-compassion, the most important one, of a caregiver, and the clarity of thought of a sage living within you as potential. In order to make this movement from just knowledge to where you're actually saying, how do I use that knowledge, developing the emotional skills, because you discover that all thinking is emotional state dependent. And if all thinking is emotional state dependent, then you're going to need to develop the emotions that give rise to the mind. That's where the ticket is. That's the second big transition in trading. You're no longer just regulating the emotion. You're actually using the emotions, emotional intelligence, to generate the mind that has an edge, that can allow you to do your edge in trading. It's all there. It can be trained. I've seen people do this for decades and decades and decades. I'm inviting you to really check this stuff out. If you don't know much about me, get my free book, go to my website, get my free book. If you want to get a little further, get Mindful Trading. That's my book that really explains the process that I'm talking about right here. And then you might want to look and start finding, oh my God, he has courses, he has group courses, he has individual courses. But first, take the first step. Find out about who you are as an emotional trader. You are. Find out who you are. And then dig deeper, watch more videos, go to the website, explore around, and start really saying, you know something, yeah, I know. I now get it. I need to make the transition from knowledge to emotional intelligence. Come visit us, friends. Good luck. Good luck. to all of you. Take care.